we are living, I think, through the Bitcoinization of TradFi. Like if you think about traditional finance, now slowly they all get Bitcoin. And now I feel like if you just come from the Bitcoin angle, like I am, it's sometimes you see everything through Bitcoin and all the news that come through your feed is all Bitcoin. And so it's really interesting. How would you describe how far we are in this Bitcoinization of TradFi? How deep did Bitcoin already kind of went into the traditional financial space? Because I think I'm in a small bubble that sees only Bitcoin at the moment.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's interesting because I kind of straddle both worlds, still in the TradFi world with a lot of my clients, but obviously working with a lot of Bitcoin companies. And I just started a Twitter account earlier in March this year, but I'm just being in the Twitter space for 8 months or so. I've very quickly gotten integrated into that whole world, and so my post is mostly Bitcoin related. But I think we're very early in the game still. A lot of the TradFi, even the biggest money manager in the world, BlackRock, is still kind of early in this game of they've created some very successful financial products, but they're still learning. They're still kind of projecting out and figuring out where is this market going to go. And that's kind of simultaneous, which has now been formally labeled as the debasement trade. Obviously, you and I know of this idea, this concept for many years now. But TradFi is kind of locking into the whole idea of a exponential debt crisis and just the amount of currency printing that has to take place to run the economy hot still. The dollar is losing its dominance in terms of being a reserve asset. And as it starts to decline, and we have many empirical examples of this, by the way, with the pound, the guilder, even as far back as Rome. Whereas your reserve status starts to decline, you're stuck in the space where you've got extreme debt load that's unserviceable, and you essentially have to either default on that debt through not paying, or have like a structured bankruptcy, or you have a massive print, which is like Larry Lepard's big print theory of you just devalue it all at once. And Luke Gromen also talks about this. But essentially, what that does, it's gonna wipe your economy, and you're gonna have some really tough times. And as you lose reserve status, you can only do this like this heavy printing as the reserve currency. So once you lose that status, you no longer have the power to print and really export your inflation across the world. Eventually, everyone, and again, we're seeing this with foreign governments, they're saying we don't want your debt, and they're going to convert to something else. So I say all of that because what seems like will happen to Bitcoin price, at least in dollar terms, is it will bubble up and continue to grow in fiat denomination. And then people, just like what they're doing with AI and with a lot of these tech plays, is it's going to convert a lot of capital into it, which is a good thing because it's going to increase adoption. But then you will see as the U.S. starts to um, not be able to manage its debt and its economy will have to contract, that default will happen through a hyperinflationary event or a depression style event. And in that credit has to get wiped completely. And I expect like 50 to 80% of the credit will just get cleaned out, and your economy is going to contract. And what that means is in fiat terms, Bitcoin is going to collapse down too. However, in the event where you have a currency collapse, people search for scarce assets. They're going to go to gold. They're going to go to other assets that are more neutral. And Bitcoin, obviously, we know is the most liquid, most available neutral asset. So they're going to go to Bitcoin as you continue to run rates lower, at least by kind of artificially through the Federal Reserve mechanic. Uh, the yen is now stuck because Japan is in a place where they can't really lower rates. They don't want to lower rates. In fact, they're increasing. We saw them increase for the first time in the last 12 months, and they probably will need to increase again, is my expectation at some point. So that's starting to break the structural system. Now, the question is, as the US lower rates, if we keep going lower, obviously that's going to spike inflation over time. And so we're stuck in this place where do we have this structural blowout between this carry trade, which is going to where a lot of this credit is, and then it just gets wiped, and you have a bunch of hedge funds and essentially a systemic banking collapse? Um, or do you just try to run it hot and hope and just try to band-aid everything? um, and I think they're going to try to run it hot, but at the same time, things are starting to get wobbly here, and there's cracks showing in the system very quickly. So yes, it's been gradually building up, and then there's going to be a sudden crack. The question is, can the U.S. Uh, how much longer can we do this type of printing where we are the reserve currency, um, and basically and export our inflation and debt to everyone? At what point do foreign banks and countries look at us and say, no, we don't want your debt anymore? And if essentially that's the nail in the coffin for Treasury reserve status. Um, and all of that ends, you don't know. Is it going to end with a depression or really a extreme inflationary event? Either one is a painful scenario in that case.
Most people have no clue what's going on. They still think we only have temporary inflation because of Putin. like we all like weird arguments like that. And obviously, like most of my audience and you get it that we need Bitcoin to protect ourselves. We need to take self custody. We need to do all those things. And I have a very good feeling that those people who get Bitcoin now will probably be fine even in this volatile area. But we have to be realistic. Like we are a few, we're very few people in general, and like and there's the mainstream of like 95 or 97 or 98 or 99% of people that are completely unaware of that. What does this mean for everyone that is unaware of Bitcoin or sound money or how to protect yourself in these volatile areas, volatile times? What does this mean for like we call them normies that don't have Bitcoin, when like a G3 nation gets hyperinflated, when the US officially or unofficially loses this reserve status, and all of a sudden like it's like a free floating thing and it's volatile and prices go up and down and like we don't really know what to do?
Yeah, I really hope for the best, but I kind of expect a very negative outcome for most people who can't convert out of the system. To me, Bitcoin is the most sensible and pragmatic way to kind of protect yourself. Um, Typically, what happens is whenever banks and sovereigns lose control, is they start to implement capital controls. They set wage limits, price limits, and essentially gap and and contain all of the capital within the system so that they can try to control it as best they can. We saw this happen with Greece, with Turkey, with Argentina, with basically any country who's suffered through hyperinflation. Um, and the problem is when you're the reserve status country, you don't really have anyone to bail you out. Typically, and sadly, what's happened is there's war. There's either internal or external conflict, and then there's a new superpower that rises through that. I very much hope we don't go into that scenario, but it would be a a possible scenario that we enter into. Um, but in the event of no war and then you just have significant capital controls, they're kind of stuck and ingrained into the system. Um, Again, all that credit would blow out, or you just hyperinflate and lose all your purchasing power. And it's going to be really painful for a lot of people. You're basically just going to have to go to work and deal with it. If you have work, by the way, institutions are the ones with capital. And right now they're looking at the macro structure. And because the government has been, the US government's been shutting down, there's no flow of liquidity. Everything's propped up on deficit spending, remember? So they're shut down. A lot of this capital is not flowing through the economy. So it makes sense. I actually posted on October 17th on my Twitter saying, like, hey, everybody, watch out when the government shuts down. Liquidity is going to get tight and you'll see asset prices drop, especially in assets like Bitcoin that are sensitive to liquidity. That is going to change over the next 6 months. I can't scream that loud enough. The Fed is pivoting to QE, rates are coming down. The bank reserves are getting extremely liquid, and every time that happens, you get this massive expansion in M2, and assets like Bitcoin are going to blow out because hedge funds and institutions are going to quickly allocate. And so you get this temporary flux to the upside of liquidity and then new allocations. And then the same thing will happen probably towards the end of 26 and 27. I'm getting very bearish based on the metrics I'm looking at. And you'll see that liquidity contract again. And then we're going to deal with high inflation, and the Fed might actually have to hike. And then bank reserves will dry up, and et cetera. So you see these cycles of liquidity, and we're about to go into a highly expansionary cycle.
Interesting. Do you actually do you also think that the cycles in Bitcoin also continue to be like that? As always, every cycle they talk of like a different cycle this time, and there's always great arguments for it. But it actually seems for me that there's a lot of really good arguments why the cycles will be different this time around.
Yes, I do think again that we've decoupled from the traditional 4-year cycle in terms of just absolute 1,000% gains. One, because the market's much more capitalized now. That doesn't mean that we can't still do a 2 to 5x in any 1 year, especially if the U.S. announces like actual acquisitions of Bitcoin at the federal level. That's a white swan. It changes the game completely. Now, absent of that event, you still see the structural institutional bid as they're looking at price ranges and just looking at, you know, at what point do we allocate. Also, a lot of pensions and corporates are very bureaucratic, slow to move, but when they do move, it's a big move. And so even a couple percent allocation from a corporate or institution in their retirement plans or whatever they're allocating from, that when you combine that in aggregate, that's a big bid. And so you've got the structural bid, and the halving cycle on the supply side, it becomes less and less important. I think 2028 is the final cycle that we'll see a little bit of that dynamic come into play. But you have to remember that like almost 99% of supply has been issued.
The first thing that every Bitcoiner does, and the most important activity that every Bitcoiner keeps on doing, is buying Bitcoin. And I personally use Relay to buy and sometimes also spend or sell my Bitcoin. And there are two main reasons why I do so. The first one is it's Bitcoin only. They do not do any shit coins. They do not do any cryptos, any stocks, or anything else. This is a tool, an app that is fully focused only and solely on Bitcoin. The second one is self-custody. They give you the keys to your Bitcoin the moment you buy them. You never give them the control over your Bitcoin, and you don't have to trust them because you can verify that you and only you have the keys to your Bitcoin. There's no third-party risk. There's no freezing of your assets. There's no rug pulling. There's nothing of that. Download Relay, the app, on your phone, or go to relay.app on your browser and use code Robin to save fees and get cheaper Bitcoin. I want to tell you about something very special to me. It's called micro seed. If you hold your Bitcoin in self-custody, and you should, you know how critical it is to secure your seed phrase. You should not have them on paper. You should not have them on anything else than titanium. With micro seed, you can engrave your 12 or 24 word seed phrase, the entire seed phrase, onto a 1-inch small washer. Yes, just one washer. All 24 words on that one washer. You can hide that thing everywhere. And even better, you don't need to buy a new kit every time you have to get a new wallet. You can make unlimited backups because MicroSeed is not selling the washer. MicroSeed is selling the device that stamps the washer. You get the full kit with the device, with the washers, with the hammer, with everything you need to get started today, and you can make with that unlimited amount of backups. Go now to microseed.io.